And we are live.
Episode 009,
Yep.
The Evolution of Speed Part 2.
Almost at the double digits.
Right? We're almost in double digits. We're almost there. And today we're going to be talking about
Strategies in training speed.
speed training strategies for the modern day athlete. Last week we talked a lot about the evolution of speed and the origins of it. Today we want to talk about strategies for the modern day athlete.
Which, if you're joining us right now on this episode and haven't seen that last one, we recommend go watch that one first as we go over the history and evolution.
A little history
to
lesson.
Give you a little bit of an insight of what we're talking about today.
So here's the thing about the modern day athlete. The modern day athlete today is extremely different from the modern day athlete back then.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest differences in defining the modern day athlete is how their year looks. So back then we would have an athlete who had an in season and they would have an off season.
Yeah.
Right. And back then they would sometimes what they would do is they would go, let's say in the winter, I'm playing football or wrestling. And then I'm transitioning to track and field, or I'm transitioning to swim, or I'm transitioning. It was more of a transition from one sport to the next.
Yeah.
So that was the athlete back then, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of movement variability that was being developed, and the athletes would get a break from their sport by doing another sport. So no one necessarily felt burned out. I talk a lot about non-contact injuries being non-existent. So going from, let's say, for example, you're finishing off your football season and then you're going straight into a basketball season. No one got hurt and no one had burnout, like mental burnout.
Yeah.
It was always like a breath of fresh air to go, oh, thank God.
Football's
over. Oh, wait, now I got wrestling. Oh, crap. Wrestling's over.
Excited for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it's always a change of seasons, so it's never the same thing over and over.
Correct.
Breath of fresh air.
And what would happen with the athlete back then, meaning probably, let's say if you're a 2000s child or younger. So like I'm class of 06, right? So we would still be fine tuning those other skills in the background without being told. So for example, during wrestling season, I remember when practice was over or on the weekends, the few times we didn't have practice, we'd all be at the local park playing basketball, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't necessarily lose those skills. So by the time we went back to that sport, we'd been playing that sport year round, but it was more like an 80-20, because 80% of maybe a 90-10. The majority of our time would be spent in the new sport. And then the little bit of free time that we had, we'd be playing tackle football with no pads.
Yeah. For the parents out there because we've talked about this in a previous podcast, if you want to quickly go over it, they have the fear of miss the FOMO, don't want to miss out. And on top of that, they don't want their kid to be behind. And we talked about like the whole motor units and how all that works. Do you want to dive in a little bit and give those parents reassurance that it's okay to take time off? It's okay to develop.
Gotcha. So short version, I don't even remember what episode that was, but the short version is that when you develop a new motor skill, it does not undo existing motor skills. So if I all of a sudden stop playing basketball and I start doing track and field, I'm not going to lose the ability to play basketball. I might say you might need a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Your timing might be a little off. So when you do go back to the sport again, you might have a little bit of a timing issue, a cadence issue. But those skills will come back almost immediately. I would say within 2 to 3 weeks, those skills will be back. So if you transition from one sport to another, those skills are not being lost because you're not training them. Skills aren't lost. Attributes can be lost.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So an attribute would be like speed, power, strength. If I stop training speed, I lose speed. If I
Yeah.
stop training power, I lose power. Skills are a little different,
Yeah.
right? Because skills have more to do with like motor development,
Yeah.
where all those other attributes have to do with stress, right?
Oh yeah.
So that's the difference. So for you parents that are wondering or worried or have a little FOMO that if your child takes some time off, they're going to lose their skills, that's not accurate. So, but back
Yeah.
to defining the modern day athlete. So first I want to paint a picture. And the reason I'm painting a picture of the athlete back then is because if you're a parent listening to this, we're we're all guilty of like, well, when we were kids, this is how we did it.
Yeah.
Well, what we did might have worked for us because the circumstances were different at that time, right? Modern day athlete, way different. So we have the specialized athlete, right? And the specialized athlete will play the same sport year round, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, I work with a lot of baseball players, and they'll have their high school season, spring training, all of that. But come summertime, travel ball, and they're doing tournament after tournament after tournament. So, the modern day athlete today doesn't necessarily have an off season. They don't have an off season.
Yeah.
So when the topic is training speed for the modern day athlete, right?
Yeah.
The first thing we have to consider when training speed or even building a speed program is we have to consider all the other things that this athlete is doing, all the physical, we have to consider the physical demands of their sport.
Yeah.
And we have to consider the physical demands that they're putting on their body already by, you know, their travel ball team, their high school team.
Does that drastically change a kid's program when you create one for them, or would you say it's a little bit different?
No, it does change it. It changes it drastically
Yeah.
because when I consider, so you got to remember that every time we do something, a practice, a game, a weightlifting session, a speed session, every time you do something, you're making a withdrawal, right?
Yeah.
From your, let's call it your energy gas tank, right? Whether it be physical, whether it be neurological, you're making withdrawals. So when I talk to an athlete and I do this in the first session,
Yeah.
they're like, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I have travel ball. I have practice every day. I have hitting lessons every Friday. And then I have a tournament over the weekend. It's just like,
Yeah. It's in so much.
and then I got 6 a.m. weight room with the high school.
Wow. Yeah.
So it sounds like I'm making this up, but that
No,
is
it's
a
real.
very common scenario, right?
Yeah.
It's more common than not. I have to consider all those demands. And what I have to do essentially is I got to fill in the gaps, right? I
Yeah.
have to fill in the training gaps. So if everything they're doing is a withdrawal, then I have to create deposits. So what's a deposit? A withdrawal to me is anything that can create inflammation. A deposit is anything that increases inflammation tolerance. So, yeah, so the first thing I have to do is I have to consider what they need, but I also got to consider everything they're doing
Yeah.
to build the appropriate program.
Looking at today's modern athletes and learning that we're specializing at a much younger age now and seeing how much training they're doing, what are some of the benefits of specializing the way we are right now? And what are some of the downsides you'd say as far as the specialization happening at a younger age in the way we're starting to train?
Well, the pros of specializing um, is motor development, right? So you're having kids do things at a faster rate. So, for example, you take a 14-year-old and he could already shoot 3-pointers from NBA range,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the motor development is fascinating, right? You're having, let's say, for example, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, a freshman in high school. and he can throw 90 miles per hour. Right.
Yeah.
So we are getting better faster, a little earlier. So if you specialize earlier, the skill development's a little earlier. The con, I feel, is the pro. So for example, your 14-year-old throws 90 miles an hour and you go, wow, that's a pro.
Yeah.
Is it? Is it? Because what I'm seeing now, and we've talked about this, we talked about this last week, is that athletes are breaking down faster.
Yeah.
High schoolers are getting Tommy John surgery. That was unheard of, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, unheard of. So you're seeing ACL reconstructions for a 16-year-old.
We talked about youth athletes, 400% increase in knee surgeries.
Yeah, it's so what we perceive as the pro, I think, is also the con.
And do you think that's overuse or mixture of many different things?
There's a lot of variables, but the common denominator is when you look at that scale of that energy scale.
Yeah.
How much am I withdrawing? How much am I asking of my body? And how much am I putting back into my body? What's my nutrition like? What's my sleep like? How much mobility training am I doing? What's my recovery? So those are like the general things I always consider is number one, what are they doing throughout the week?
Yeah.
And then with that information, we build a program.
So then, because obviously now we're talking about the strategies, going into the strategies of what we can start doing with our modern day athletes. What does an average off-season week kind of look like for an athlete? What does an average maybe in-season week look like for an athlete? For the parents, that maybe how often am I putting them in competition? Because we've talked about it's like 80-20 depending on the age and stuff. What strategizing it, looking at it, how can we start getting our kids still faster, still stronger, but less injury prone?
Correct. Okay. So because, you said in season versus off season, that's assuming they have an actual off season, which most of them do not.
Yeah.
So if they are a year round athlete, then the training needs to be year round. The recovery needs to be year round. The speed has to be year round. The power training should be trained year round. The differences, one of the biggest differences, and this is one of the things that I teach, is learning how to auto-regulate your effort and your strategy with everything you're doing. For example, I always tell the athletes there's 3 basic modes when we train speed. And the reality is these modes can also be applied to the sport. They can be applied to their own practice. But these are the 3 modes that we're always going to be in. We're either going to be in practice mode, right?
Yeah.
So practice mode is you're focusing on motor development. So motor skills are the priority when we're practicing. I'm learning how to use my body, right?
Yeah, which I remember that was an issue with a lot of practice. It wasn't the intention, as we've talked about. It was not actually learning in the practice as much as it was just going full speed, full effort, which is different from hard work, and tiring ourselves out. And now they're trying to figure out, why did we not win the championship game when everyone's gassed?
And you would think you'd be in great shape because of all the running you're doing, right? But no one's in great shape.
Yeah.
They're like neurologically taxed. So the first mode is I teach is the practice mode, which is we are learning how to move or developing motor skills, right? So that could be applied to a speed drill. That could be applied to some mobility. I'm teaching them how to learn about themselves, right? I'm familiarizing themselves with themselves. So that's practice mode. Then I have training mode. Training mode is we are stimulating the body with stress, with the intention of creating adaptation, right? So whether it be a neurological stress where I'm like, hey, on this sprint, I want you to feel, 90% of your maximum effort.
Yeah.
Or on this lift, I want you to go at 40% of your maximum weight, but I want you to be fast with it, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I'm teaching them dynamic speed with weights, or maybe it's conditioning and I'm saying, hey, I want to see how well you can replicate maybe that suicide. When you're fatigued, can you still maintain that same time? Can you still hit that time gap? That 1 minute suicide or 55 second suicide while fatigued. So with training, we are biasing the stress, whether it be towards strength, whether it be towards power, whether it be through speed, whether it's
Gotcha.
neurological, whether
Yeah.
it's, in the joint. But there is stress involved. So it's controlled. So training to me is controlled stress in a controlled environment.
Gotcha. Because obviously you said you have some kids who do have an off season and do get the time to take on development, and the kids who are year round. You talk about how you still try to implement development, obviously within their training. Do you see a pretty good difference between the kids who do have an off season and do have the time to actually put in that amount of effort needed to really get the development going? Or because I know some parents might be questioning right now, like, should I take my kid out maybe for an off season for him to get some development? Is there really that big of a difference, or is it kind of just?
You're talking about the athlete who's year round versus the athlete who has a true off season.
Yeah.
I've seen both be successful, and I've also seen both fail. The difference is the intention behind how they approach something. So when I'm talking about like these different modes,
Yeah.
practice mode, training mode. So what I will do is I will educate kids, and this is very important as parents. We have to, be educated as well. Let's say an athlete is, let's say he has to run suicides at practice, right?
Yeah.
But that same athlete, let's say it's for track and field or basketball. I'm sorry. Let's say it's basketball, but let's say that same athlete did 0 period weight room.
Yeah.
Right after school, they did sprints, and now they got to go to basketball practice. That's from, I don't know, like 5 to 8 or whatever, making the scenario up, right?
Yeah.
So it's very important that that athlete, if they understand, okay, I've been making all of these withdrawals, then I'm going to change my strategy in how I do that thing. So if it's suicides, maybe I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to focus the suicide not on the time, hitting the time. I'm going to focus on breathing. I'm going to focus on being as relaxed as possible. Right?
Yeah.
So it is very important that athletes are setting intentions before the practice, before the training, before the session. So the intention has to be preset.
Yeah.
I can't just show up and work hard.
Yeah.
Show up and work hard because, as kids, effort's a really important thing, right?
Yeah.
Effort is really, really important. But as you get older, we can't just go hard on everything, right? If you're a parent, imagine if I told you, I want you to get up and sprint as fast as you can. Yeah, bad things are going to happen. You're going to pull a hammy. You're going to get injured. So we can't just tell a kid to just go hard.
Yeah. I mean, hard work doesn't even always have to just be an effort thing. It can also just be, are you paying attention? Are you actually being attentive? Are you watching me, listening to me? And are your senses, are you actually coming in with the intention to make sure you do what the actual intention of that exercise is? It's not always just the effort level. That's how I kind of see it. I know we've talked about that too.
Yeah, effort is viewed as a physical attribute only, where effort is a holistic attribute. So setting an intention before, that's part of giving 100%, right? Going hard.
Yeah.
Maybe after you're hitting, you're looking at film. That to me, that's giving it 100%. So it's being as complete as possible is my definition of giving 100%. But when you tell an athlete, I need you to give it 100%, everybody equates that to physical effort, physical exertion. So if I'm not crawling out of the practice, right?
Yeah.
Then I didn't do it right. So I'll give you a funny story. I remember years ago, I was working with a bunch of defensive and offensive linemen. I was working with a program called Giant Skills. I believe they're still around. Awesome program. And, they help linemen get to that next level. But these are some of the biggest humans I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, yeah.
Besides the fact, one of the things that I was teaching them, it was a lineman speed clinic. That's what I was doing. And I was teaching them how to be fast and how to use their momentum to cover more distance without gassing themselves out. So momentum, the way I taught it was it's the motion after effort, right? So it's like if I were to ride my bike, assuming the ground's flat, and then I stop pedaling, my bike's still going to be going at that same speed for a while. Yeah. And then eventually it stops. So I explained to them how momentum is mass times velocity, right? But because these guys are all 300 pounds, their momentum, they're going to have much more momentum than a running back or a different position, right?
I don't think linemen get as much credit as they should. Because I mean, I've been recently really looking into like the effects of BMI on the joints and stuff. And those dudes have to go through so much recovery just because of all that weight being placed on all those joints that have to support it. And then the training on top of it, big boys. Those guys, I mean, there's a reason why their quarterbacks love them so much.
Yeah,
because they put in so much work, dude.
Okay, so I taught these guys how to use momentum. And essentially, so picture a 300-pound human sprinting 10 yards.
Yeah.
How much distance were they able to cover after the 10-yard sprint?
Double, maybe triple the amount.
They were covering like 50, 60 yards on a 10-yard sprint. So they would sprint for 10 yards, and then their momentum would carry them for a while, but you wouldn't see their speed die off, because with the way momentum works is the moment you relax your body, that velocity, just like when I stopped pedaling my bike, that velocity stays the same for a while, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's backtrack a little bit. So that's the skill that I taught them. And one of the linemen, I was actually at Temecula Valley High School. He was at the school that I was working with. So he was at the clinic, but he also knew me because I was always at his high school.
Yeah.
So he comes up to me, and coach is having everybody run lines in pads, full pads of running lines. And he comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, coach, is it okay if I use level 0? Level 0 is what I refer to as momentum, just do nothing." And I was like, "No, you're not allowed to use technique when you're running." He looked at me, he saw my sarcasm, and he goes, "Oh, okay, cool. So I can use it when we're running lines?" Because the coach would have them run like, 25 yards back, 35 yards back, 50 yards back. And they would do the lines. And for a big guy, that's not fun, right?
No.
So I see the same kid 2 days later.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Coach," he goes, "that was awesome." He goes, "Not only did I not get tired, because I was in his brain, he was only running 10 yards and he was letting his momentum take him the rest of the way."
Yeah.
Everybody else was running the full 50 yards. Yeah. Sprinting, right? He goes, "I was in first place."
Such a big part of sports.
So watch this. So the lineman was in first place, and he ended up getting the rest of the team in trouble because he was using momentum, which is a strategy for efficiency. The coach yelled at everybody. He goes, "Look at him. He's not even tired. He's not even breathing hard. And he's out. Look at his effort."
Little does he know. It's just,
he had no idea that he was actually being the laziest, right?
Yeah.
He was being the laziest, letting his 300 pounds push him to the finish line.
Work smarter, not harder.
But he was still in first place. So there's this, that's the very definition of efficiency. Efficiency is you're getting maximum results with minimal input, minimal output.
Yeah.
Maximum output with minimal input. He was sprinting 10 yards, covering 50.
Yeah.
Everybody else got in trouble because they're like, "What's going on with this guy?" So fast forward to like maybe a week later, I wanted to try something out at the practice, and I had the kids. I said, I chose one of the kids that, I'm sorry. I said, "Who's the fastest kid on the team?"
Yeah.
I asked the kids, "Who's the fastest kid on the team that does not train with me?" Because at that time I was working with, I don't know, maybe 20, 30. I think I was working like 30 of their players.
Yeah.
So they picked this other kid who was really fast. And I said, "Okay, we're going to do a suicide and you're going to race against him." And I pointed out one of the kids who was a lot slower. And everyone's like, "Oh, he's going to get smoked." Yeah. Right. And I said, "That's fine." And so I told the kid Same thing. I said, hey, I want you to burst on the first 5-7 yards and let your momentum carry. I said, he's going to get a head start on you. But we're doing this. I think it was like, I don't know if it was like 5 or 10 times, but it was like a minute worth of sprinting, right?
Yeah.
I said, don't be discouraged. He's going to have a big lead on you in the beginning because he's going to be beating you with effort. You're going to use technique and you're only going to sprint the first 7 yards and let your momentum take you the rest of the way and change directions with your eyes. I gave him some technique tips.
Yeah.
Boom, I get the stopwatch. The whole football, you know how the energy is with the football team, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's watching, and sure enough, he's getting burned off the line. Boom, this kid takes off, changing directions, and you can tell he's very competitive. So what's he doing?
Full
effort, right?
Full time, yeah.
So I remember what the event was. It was a 300-meter dash, which takes about a minute.
Yeah.
Takes about a minute, 300 yards.
Yeah.
So it was 300 meters. So right about the halfway point, that lactic acid in those quads and hammies started building up. And the athlete who was in the very, very front, all of a sudden it looked like he was struggling not to sprint. He was struggling to jog. Like he literally looked like someone was pulling him back. And then guess who starts catching him?
Yeah.
The one who had technique. And he had good strategy, right? He ended up beating him. By the end, he could barely walk the first guy that was really fast. And everyone, you could imagine, the football field was like, everyone's screaming, losing their minds because this, athlete was perceived by the team as one of the fastest on the team had gotten beat by not the slowest, but it was someone mediocre. So that's an example. That the point of that story was that's an example of how you can apply technique. Technique is about efficiency, right?
Yeah.
And if your efficiency, sometimes coaches will make you do things that maybe it's not optimal for your body. Maybe it's not optimal in general. Maybe you're already super tired. So now all of a sudden you take an athlete who's doing all this training, but one has the mindset of I'm applying strategy. I'm applying technique. I'm applying breath cadence. I'm showing up to practice 10 minutes early to open up my joints and make sure, I'm not feeling tight. That's the difference. So whether you have an in season or an off season, or whether you're playing the same sport year round, the important thing is the preset intentions that you're creating before the practice, before the training, and before the session.